To the France 24 debate, can the Palestinians create a united front? Unprecedented talks have been taking place in Gaza. The result of these will have a knock-on effect on any progress towards peace in the Middle East. Back to our panel in a moment. First, let's listen to some reaction from Gaza, where Hamas freed Fatah prisoners as an opening gambit before negotiations began.
We are extremely happy and we wish for a speedy release of the rest of the political detainees. I hope that the rest of our brothers in jail will be released soon.
What's your message to the Gaza government?
I send a message to all leaders that they must hurry up and reconcile. And God willing, we will have national unity and become one people.
Smile on that little girl's face as that gentleman was speaking, very much telling the story. And it's that little girl's future that we should really be talking about tonight, I think. I'm sure our guests agree with that. Well, they're nodding already, which is often a good sign. Ofer BRONCHTEIN is from the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation in the Mideast. Thank you, sir, for being with us. On the other side of our studio, though not necessarily against, Renée PRANGÉ, who's from the non-governmental group France-Palestine Solidarité, or France-Palestine Solidarity, to give it an English twist. We have here in the studio Dr. Hussam ZOMLOT, excuse me, sir, member of Fatah and also director of the International Affairs Commission in Palestine. Good to see you, sir. And joining us by satellite from the Gaza Strip, a gentleman who is a political analyst, not a commentator for Hamas, as I got wrong, but certainly someone who can give us maybe more of an insight into what Hamas might be thinking. He is Dr. Hani AL-BASOOS, Professor of Political Science from the Islamic University in Gaza. Sir, I will start with you. We heard that prisoner being released, calling for the leaderships to unite, for people to unite. Maybe you can tell me on the ground that people there want the same thing to happen.
Well, this was a good gesture was made by Hamas government in Gaza, releasing 10 prisoners from Fatah, and this is an indication that Hamas is having the intention to make unity and to make reconciliation. This will make people happy and thinking, really, this is an indication that unity would come up soon. All people in the Gaza Strip have been talking all the time for the past 2-3 days about unity and reconciliations. Now, at this moment, before I come to the studio, I was watching people out in the street talking and cheering out about delegations coming from the West Bank and from Egypt to negotiate the unity and to implement the reconciliation agreement, which was signed in Egypt in 2011. All people have the intention to push both sides, Fatah and Hamas, to end such division and have unity. And I think this can be the last hope between Fatah and Hamas, ending the division which lasted for the past 7 years. The situation has been really difficult in Gaza and even in the West Bank, especially in the Gaza Strip. The crisis, humanitarian situation has been difficult. Most people living under poverty line. The need for much more of the young people, unemployment, high rate of unemployment, the sewage mixed with water, a difficult life. The siege has an impact on all people in the Gaza Strip, and such things have an impact on Hamas government, which I think and I believe that it's trying to make its best to alleviate the suffering of the people. But I think unity would make the best of this, in which Hamas would give some of the responsibility back to Mr. Mahmoud Abbas as the head of the Palestinian Authority. Don't forget at the same time that in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority have been under severe pressure by the United States and the Israeli occupation forces to make some concessions in peace negotiations, but this did not take place. So I think Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, both parties under severe pressure by the Palestinian community and by the situation on the ground, the political and humanitarian situation, and even talking about the regional situation. Egypt is not as much as it used in the past to be the main player, because it has its own political and security situations and issues, and will not be able to manage the Palestinian case. So the only way left here is for Hamas and Fatah to be able to negotiate their own cause and and conflict and come back to the people and having unity.
I hear what you're saying. It's one of these things, and we agree
division to
with
be
you. The
ended
situation
for once and
in
for
the Gaza
all.
Strip,
Once and for all.
the situation in the Gaza Strip, as you were saying, and as François Picard reported many times in the past, is pretty deplorable for the people on the ground, the ordinary people who are affected by the political decisions taken by the people who are leading them. I want to bring in our representative from Fatah here. Because we don't have anybody from Hamas to speak about this. Some people watching this may say, well, whatever happens to the people ruled by Hamas, that's their problem because Hamas are terrorists. That's what they might say as one thing. What I'm asking you is, there are clear differences between you and Hamas, which maybe we need a documentary to illustrate and not this brief debate programme. Can you tell us what maybe the two major issues would be that you'd need to resolve? Pretty briefly?
Well, there are very serious differences. There are differences in our political program, where we want to go, and there are differences in terms of the tools we use to attain our goals. We in Fatah believe that the most important tools are within international law, that we need to abide by international legitimacy.
And the point that Hamas goes beyond that.
And we always call Hamas and invite Hamas to make sure that it is within this paradigm. Because we disagree with some of the tools that Hamas use today. Hamas has to decide. Either it wants to be a faction on its own and behave on its own grounds, or it wants to be part of the Palestinian collective political system. And if it decides to be part of the Palestinian political system, and I hope it will decide so, there are rules that Hamas has to abide by. And all what we ask for, and I don't approve, nor I really accept the international conditions, the quartet conditions.
Because clearly Israel will talk to you, but not to Hamas.
I don't approve of the conditions. Recognize Israel. Hamas is not a state to recognize Israel. We recognize Israel as a state in the making, the PLO. Hamas has nothing to do with recognition. We want Hamas to abide by one thing only: international law. And whatever the international law provides, Hamas has the ability to do so. And we want to make sure that we are within this arena. Some of the behavior has cost us morally, the Palestinians, big time. But this brings us back to the most important issue. A politics and policy for the last 8 years by Hamas and us, by the Arabs. We've talked about it today. I hope the moment has arrived that these two stakeholders are online or in line. The others is Israel and the international community. And here it is an opportunity to really talk about such a failed, ill-perceived policy by Israel in the last 7 years, 8 years, believing that besieging an entire nation. Gaza is 38% of the Palestinian people living inside the occupied territories. Gaza has almost 2 million. There was a UNDP report last year saying that Gaza by the year 2020, which is in less than 6 years' time, has to be evacuated. Every single human being has to leave because it's no longer inhabited or can be inhabited by the human race because of water, electricity. All this is the product of the siege. The politics of Israel so far and the policies of Israel is collective punishment. So the people will not de-elect Hamas. No, they want to keep the division. Otherwise, how do you convince me that Israel closed the northern borders, areas, which could have allowed Israel to supervise security, any smuggling, allowed Israel to collect taxes and send it back to Ramallah. But on the other hand, Israel was very happy, or at least was fine, with the smuggling underneath the tunnels for so many years that goes to Hamas. So Israel was thinking from a policy point of view, feeding the division was something very, very important. Keeping the Palestinians as such on a cliff, both of them in Ramallah and Gaza, is the best policy. That's wrong. And it's wrong for Israel to think that Hamas being part of our political system is to the disadvantage of Israel. In my opinion, it is to the advantage of Israel. Because if really Israel genuinely wants peace, it's better to sign peace with 100% of the Palestinians rather than 70 or 80 or whatever that number is.
Hussam, Israel might say, and I'll play devil's advocate, Israel might say, you should stop firing rockets at their territory.
Well, Israel says
that's what Hamas does, yes? Apparently. It's documented.
I don't want to play because there's no Hamas person here. I have so much in disagreement with the Hamas logic, with the Hamas policy, with the way they have betted on the region, and with the way they have departed from the Palestinian cause. I have so much grievances about the way Hamas has played in the Israeli hand by taking Gaza out of the equation. Gaza is the Palestinian engine of revolutions and of nationalism. And then Israel for the last so many years doesn't mention Gaza whatsoever. And is just imprisoning the people of Gaza. I have my grievances. However, the future has no grievance. The future has to have hopes. And they have a place with me. They have a place in my political system. And I'll have to find that place. But they have to understand that today this place is conditioned upon some certain behavior.
Let's bring in Ofer to talk about the importance, sir, of what's going on in Gaza and the importance of that going forward? Because clearly, if there are, or is rather, one Palestinian voice talking with Israel, that has to be a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Or a better starting point.
First of all, I do share the analysis of Hussam. If the Hamas is becoming a political fraction amongst the PLO, amongst the Palestinian people, it has its place, as extremist parties have their place in Israel.
Do you think they can sort out the differences?
At the same time, I want to rectify that. I'm not here to represent the Israeli government.
Understood.
But I want to add a few things. Let's not forget the closure of Gaza must end.
Yeah.
2 million people cannot suffer no more.
It's savage.
And the Hamas is responsible for it as well. It's not the only responsible for it, but his action puts the people of Gaza in this situation as well. Not only Israel is responsible for the seas. Israel is a man responsible, but Egypt is responsible as well. Let's not forget that the Hamas has 2 borders, one to Israel and the other one for Egypt. And the Egyptian one is close to the Palestinian as well. So I do believe that international efforts have to be made to ease on the people of Gaza. And I hope that this reconciliation process, this agreement that may be achieved tonight, and I hope that it will be respected, because let's not forget that already 2 agreements were signed between Hamas and Fatah. The last one in Doha 2 years ago, and was not respected by the Hamas in the end of the day. I hope that this one will be respected for the sake and the well-being of the people of Gaza. Even saying that, again, if, and we all wish for a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict once and for all, and I do believe that we are in a critical time today. The end of negotiation is supposed to be in a week from now, and I believe that we won't get in a week from now to an historical agreement between Israel and Palestine. It will be moved at the same time.
What I'm hearing, I have to go, yes.
Let me add one thing. Let's not forget that now, at the same time that Fatah and Hamas are talking in Gaza, Israel and Palestine are talking in Jerusalem. And I do believe that the Israeli and the Palestinian talk should continue.
Quick word, please, from Hussam ZOMLOT, before you go to your meeting with Jimmy Carter, I understand.
Yes. And this meeting with the President Carter and with the elders of the many is also about how do we press ahead with a different mode of engagement. The crime that has been committed against the people of Gaza, the crime that has been committed against the people of the West Bank, the denial of the basic rights have to end and end now. And there are parties to these crimes. It's not just the division. Israel is responsible on Gaza. Gaza is under full occupation. Today, it doesn't matter if you are inside or you are besieging the people. So Israel has and if Egypt makes mistakes, why Israel should follow any other
Nobody
country?
should make mistakes.
Now is the question that you mentioned, Ofer, and I agree with you. This is not a zero-sum game. And I hope your message will reach now the Israeli government, because the coalition today believe it's a zero-sum game. They believe every Palestinian child who is hungry, perhaps Israel will be better off. Or every Palestinian unemployed will seek immigration, Israel will be more gripping. You know that.
Absolutely.
Today is a time when Israel has to come to its senses. This is not about Hamas recognizing Israel. The PLO has recognized Israel. And if Hamas wants to be part of the PLO, ahlan wa sahlan, they are welcome. But we recognize Israel. This is the time when Israel recognizes us as an entity, as a nation, as a state on the 1967 borders. What we see and what we live on the ground is an absolute current rejection by the current Israeli government of the notion, of the idea of Palestinian statehood, not only by words, but by deeds. This is the challenge. Believe you me, the moment this is altered, the moment the zero-sum game goes away from the Israeli political thinking, is a moment when all this will be sorted. Because the commonalities in that very small piece of land is way more than differences. We are bleaked. We are plagued by leaders who play on our fears, on Iran, and before Iran, on Iraq. They don't play on our aspirations and inspiration and our future. Today, the Israelis need a leader that will play on their inspiration. We have Mahmoud Abbas, and I'm hoping that this man will be invested in, because he has changed our genes. He has convinced us that non-violence pays off. And he has convinced us that non-violence pays off when it was the most unpopular thing to say. Remember, during the Second Intifada, when our blood was being spilled on the ground, and he came out and said, non-violence.
Absolutely.
This is a man.
Now he has to convince the Hamas as well.
This is a man that we need in Israel. We need somebody like that who will lead his nation, not calculate the small calculations and thinking that the status quo is very comfortable and I can do whatever I
Status quo
want.
is a catastrophe for everybody.
That's a catastrophe, and nothing less than a transformation Israel will do. And if this transformation doesn't happen, I think the pressure has to come from outside, from the solidarity movement of the world. I think the occupation has to know that this is not for free. There is a cost associated.
Well, ZOMLOT, I am under instruction to liberate you at this point in time. You've got your meeting with Jimmy Carter in Paris. Thank you, sir, for your contributions, and thank you for sparing time to join us here at François Picard. Pleasure to meet you. Let's bring in our guest in the Gaza Strip, Hani AL-BASOOS, who is from the Islamic University of Gaza. So you've been listening to what's being said here. I imagine people in Gaza, if they could hear this debate, they can hear this discussion, they might be maybe heartened by what they can hear. They might be enthusiastic about what they can hear.
Of course, yes, people in Gaza Strip so educated and understand well the language of communication, and they understand the outside world. The same thing, I think, for most leaders in Hamas and other Palestinian political factions. They understand well what we are talking about, and I think and I hope that the Israeli occupation forces and Netanyahu government hoping to understand the language of the Palestinian people and what they need. What Palestinian people need in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank and everywhere. They need to end the occupation, and I completely agree with Mr. Hussam, my friend Hussam. All what he said is perfectly said, that all Palestinian people need the unity to end the occupation. The Gaza Strip is still under occupation. People of Gaza believe that even though in 2005 there was a withdrawal from Gaza Strip by the Israeli government and the Israeli occupation forces, despite all of this, we still under complete occupation. So I think people would want to wake up to find no occupation, to find no persecution, to have a freedom and dignity, to have a decency of life. 2020, life in Gaza will be unbearable. You cannot imagine how the situation in Gaza, it's really difficult to witness and to see. So I think people are waiting, hoping at the same time that in the next few hours, good news would come up, and myself, I'm hoping that good news would come up from the meeting which can be held between Fatah and Hamas in the next few days. It's not going to be only one meeting. There will be many meetings between Fatah and Hamas and all Palestinian political factions to be able to implement the unity, talking about elections and Palestinian unity government, hoping that no obstacles will be, and hoping that the Israeli occupation forces will not make any obstacles for the unity, as we could see in the last 1 or 2 days, that they attempted to stop one of the delegates to come to the Gaza Strip, but at the end they have made it. As I said again, hoping things will be changed completely. The way people feel in Gaza, it's not the same thing like in France or even in the West Bank. People in Gaza have been under severe pressure. Life is unbearable. It's not in 2020, it's now. We don't have electricity, we don't have pure water, we don't have many basic needs. So hoping that unity and reconciliation will bring back decency and will bring back love and a peaceful life and democracy. So I'm myself hoping that situation would be completely changed, that people in Gaza would feel much better. We will be able to communicate with the West Bank. We can move to the West Bank, and hoping that the Israeli government would stop its action and its aggression against the people of Palestine. Unity is something necessary. We need it to stop the Israeli occupation, to be able to fight back. It's not to fight the international community, as one of your guests mentioned at the beginning. I think Hamas and other Palestinian factions were trying to make communication with the outside world. We have seen many delegations in Gaza from the United States, from the European community. We have good channels of communication with them, trying to open up all kind of contacts. It's not a closed community. As I mentioned at the beginning, people of Gaza and in Palestine as well understand the language of the international community well, but they want somebody to understand what we say here.
Sir, I need to cut you off. Ofer BRONCHTEIN has a comment. Sir, go ahead.
I said one of the main conditions is that Hamas will reject any violence as a mean to achieve political goals.
That is the main issue, because that's why they're accused of being terrorists.
Only by accepting the authority of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, who decided that violence is out of it, the Hamas will be able to achieve. But let's not forget that only yesterday, the Hamas threw rockets on the south of Israel, which cannot be accepted by the Israelis.
This is the issue, and this is why the international community condemns Hamas. Renée PRANGÉ, give us your thoughts, because I'm sure there are many.
Even though we condemn the terrorism, we think that it's looking at the landscape by the small side of the glasses, because the Palestinian people is a single people. It's a whole. It's the West Bank people and Gaza Strip people. You cannot. Israel tried to split it, to divide it. They were committed to have a physical connection between West Bank and Gaza Strip for years after the Oslo Agreement. They never did it because they wanted to split them, because it's easier to win against two small entities, to make them fight one against the other.
So are you saying Israel forced that split between Hamas and Fatah?
They did.
But why is Hamas using violence to achieve political means? They used Hamas for that. Listen, I hate to be in this situation and in this position that I have to defend something that sometimes I don't want to defend. By killing children and elderly people in buses, you cannot achieve anything.
Okay, I'll allow Renée to speak now, please.
That the question of Hamas is not a question of the people in the Gaza Strip. And Israelis have been manipulating the Hamas, of course. Every time it was quiet, they sent a plane, they killed people, they killed important people, the moderate ones. They always killed the moderate ones in the Gaza Strip, and elsewhere in the West Bank as well. And then there was a spring of violence each time. When it's too quiet, they manipulate Hamas, they manipulate the extremist part of the Hamas and
Israel
of the jihad.
Cannot be blamed for every problem in the Middle East. Israel cannot be blamed. Again, I don't like to be in... occupation needs to end. Israel has to be serious when it comes to the peace talk. But excuse me. Hundreds of people died in Syria today. Hundreds of Palestinians are being killed by the Syrian regime today. Where are you? Where's the solidarity movement with Palestine, where Palestinians are being killed by the Syrian regime every day? So please, Israel cannot be blamed for all the diseases of the Middle East.
Keep quiet. We are working also for the Palestinians.
I don't hear your voice when it comes to the Syrian tragedy.
You must not have
I didn't hear you. You are talking for half an hour. Did you say something about the Palestinians being killed in refugee camps in Syria?
Because
not a word.
It's not the topic.
What do you mean? The topic not to protect you. You yourself just said the Palestinians are only one people. So the refugees in Syria don't count? They're not part of these people?
I was told by telephone that the topic
was... The debate is between the Hamas. But again, you have a tendency to blame Israel for everything. Syria. The Hamas will stop violence. Is legitimate. The Hamas will accept the authority of Mahmoud Abbas. Is legitimate. The Hamas will continue by violence. It won't be legitimate. It will be fought and it will be a terrorist organization. By the international community.
Did you look at the graphics of the rockets? I against the rockets, but every time Israel didn't fight, didn't send raids, didn't raid into the Gaza Strip, every time Israel stopped,
the violence of Israel must stop.
There was no rockets.
The violence of Israel must stop. The closure of Gaza must stop. The Palestinian people deserve immediately a Palestinian state. Occupation must stop. But terrorism and violence must stop as well.
Let me give Renée a clear question, clear answer. Renée.
That is the rules that will be put for an agreement. That's part of the agreement. Okay. So it's not the only point which exists. That one of the points of the agreement, of course. Okay, but there are a lot of other points.
Absolutely.
And in particular, to allow people from Gaza, of course, to have water, to have the right to export, to have the right to import.
Absolutely, we need to help them now.
Also to go from Gaza Strip to the West Bank
Are you expecting an agreement between the two?
Of course.
You're expecting this to happen?
We think that there is no possibility of
so it has to happen
without an agreement between both sides.
Do you think both Fatah and Hamas can put aside their differences and work together?
If the government in apparently in the West Bank, they have understood that there's
Hamas has no
way.
choice today.
They try to discuss with the Israelis. The negotiations were only concerning the West Bank, nothing about Gaza, and they failed. So they understand that they have to go
needs to
together.
be a united Palestinian voice. Renée, Pranger, thank you very much
peace.
indeed. Ofer,
A
BRONCHTEIN,
non-violent one.
thank you very much indeed for your points of view. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all our guests, both Nia and Far. We're out of time. That was the debate. Stay with us here on France 24.